آزادی بیان.
言论自由。
free speech.
The miscreant, the Buddha says, engages in idle chatter. He speaks out of season. He speaks what isn't factual, what isn't in accordance with the goal. Words that are not worth treasuring. Anguttara Nikaya. This is surely the most challenging norm to understand, let alone explain and justify. Idle speech is nothing more than expression that is, in the circumstances, pointless. In the circumstances is important. Making polite conversation, chatting about the weather, singing to yourself in the shower are none of them in the relevant circumstances pointless, and they are not what the Buddha worries about when he discourages idle speech. And there may be nothing false or abusive in time-wasting gossip or hot air. There may be nothing divisive. It's also a separate norm to the other three. And yet, think how much utterly pointless speech surrounds us every day. From celebrity gossip to the next person on the mobile and the train, giving an oral ordnance survey map of his voyage, to the tsunami of trivia that pours through your Twitter feed. Those of us who were born before the internet have no idea how the post-internet generation lives and swims in this as fish swim in water. Most of it utterly idle, pointless speech. Now, idle speech is not, in some of the texts, I know it's represented this way, it's not really gossip, because gossip has a flavor of being slightly, well, mildly malicious, or maybe an invasion of privacy. And idle speech is not what we call nowadays too much information, the embarrassing self-revelation that also surrounds us in all of the same media. Idle speech is just what it says, speech that has no point, or no point here in this season, in this point just now. And indeed, many of the Buddha's examples are of this sort. Again, the first worry about idle speech, like divisive speech, is as unique to a contemplative environment. And once again, a comparison with the Benedictine rule is instructive. Both the Buddha and St. Benedict think that men, well, they were men in Benedict's case, but happily not in the Buddha's case. That men, and in the Buddha's case, men and women should spend most of their time speaking on higher things. Indeed, the Buddhist texts have wonderful lists. One of the great things about the Pali Canon is these massive lists of things. There are 18 forms of this and 9 forms of that, and there are 10 forms of approved speech for monks, some of which are quite entertaining and interesting. And they're attached to the notion that monks should think only on higher things, that they should be contemplative. And here, just quickly, is the list, and this, not quite idle, but this is just for a bit of fun. Here's the 10 permissible topics of conversation that are not idle, as we have them in the Anguttara Nikaya. Talk about modesty, contentment, seclusion, non-entanglement. Talk about arousing persistence, virtue, concentration, discernment, release, and knowledge and the vision of release, says the Buddha. Actually, I made that to be 11, but I suppose it does depend on how you count release and the vision of release. And apart from that, we ought to more or less remain in silent meditation. Well, look, that's not a norm for us, because we are not, or not yet, or anyway, or not fully monks and contemplatives. But I think, again, there is a way to secularize and generalize this and take it out of this unusual environment. One thing about idle speech, and the thing that is going to, I hope, occur to you when we think about the examples I gave, is that it is phenomenally time-wasting. We don't have all the time in the world, and never mind whether we are a continuing personality from the beginning to the end of that time. In the present moment, I should waste as little of my time as possible on speech that is of to no purpose whatever. The second is that idle speech is distractive. Again, think of the person beside you with the mobile phone on the train. It's not just that it's embarrassingly revelatory or a low-grade nuisance. It's just very hard not to attend at some measure to what someone else is saying. And when it's as pointless as "we are at Basingstoke," said in non-urgent circumstances to someone who does not care whether he's at Basingstoke or anywhere else, it is distracting. Not just distracting from thinking about higher things, but just plain distracting. Now, Rosa Luxemburg famously challenged, I think it was a cousin, if I remember, of hers, who said at an anarchist gathering, to her, it does not behove an agitator to dance. Rosa apparently was a great dancer, I didn't know this. She said she despaired of that sort of anarchism. I insisted, this is from her diary, I insisted that our cause could not expect me to become a nun, and that the movement should not be turned into a cloister. If it meant that, I did not want it. I want freedom, the right to self-expression, and everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things. That's the passage, the real passage, by the way, that is endlessly misquoted as, "If I can't dance, I'm not coming to your revolution." I mean, you know, a similar kind of thought, but she's a little more pointed in it. Now, Luxemburg is correct about that. We do want everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things. But pointless drivel and idle speech is one of the things that gets in the way of enjoying the beautiful and the radiant. Moreover, idle speech very often is speech that purports to be something more than idle. And the Buddha spends an enormous amount of time on this point. He's reacting, as many of you know, to a Vedic religious tradition in which speech was sacral, in which speech was ritual, and in which verses were recited for various incantatory reasons of dubious consequential or other value. We have it in the Dhammapada. You can see who he's talking about here. Better than 1,000 verses composed of meaningless words is a single word of verse which, having heard, brings peace. Well, that makes those of us who are atheists feel rather good. The Vedas get it in the neck, and Buddha, the great therapist, as Nietzsche called him, has pointed out the way in which resisting idle speech leaves room even for the rights to the beautiful and the engaging. But the bad news is Buddha has a message for you and me, because it's not merely the Brahmins that waste time with ritual incantation. Some people waste their time in wordy warfare, saying, for example, "You don't understand this Dhamma and discipline. I understand this Dhamma and discipline. What I said is consistent, what you said is not. What you've thought for so long is entirely reversed. Your statement is refuted. You're talking rubbish." Now this sutta, for me anyway, stings, because the Buddha here is criticizing philosophy. And the philosophy that the Buddha is criticizing, the wordy warfare, is philosophy that is, from the salvific point of view, pointless, useless. He drives home this point in the famous parable of the arrow, the poisoned arrow. A wounded man refuses to have the toxin taken out until he's told the clan and caste of the archer, the wood that the bow was made of, the kind of feathers that were in the tail. All the meanwhile, the Buddha says he dies. And the Buddha tells Malonkaputta, to whom this sutta is addressed, he says, much the same thing is true of your philosophy. When there's the view the cosmos is eternal, and when there's the view the cosmos is not eternal, there is still birth, there is still aging, there is death, there is sorrow, there is lamentation, pain, despair, and distress, whose destruction I make known in the here and now. Well, it's not quite a condemnation of philosophy, but it's a condemnation of a kind of philosophy that only 50 years ago we used to dismiss as nonsense. A term that philosophers become reluctant to use nowadays, but quite a lot of nonsense remains in philosophy for reasons that Kant knew. The free interplay of reason has a reasonable prospect of getting above itself and saying things that are really useless.